They thought I was just another quiet, ordinary man, a harmless neighbor, someone they could bully, fine, and frame without consequences. But what they didn't know was that I'm the man whose job is to make the most dangerous criminals in the world wish they were never born. I didn't come here for war. I came here for peace. But when HOA Karen and her pack of petty tyrants set fire to my reputation, I turned their perfect little world into a living nightmare. The first time I met HOA Karen, she didn't even bother to introduce herself. She didn't smile. She didn't shake my hand. She just walked straight up to my driveway, pointed at my motorcycle, and said, "This isn't in compliance with neighborhood regulations." Her voice was sharp, like she'd been rehearsing complaints all her life. I didn't argue. I'd just moved into Maplewood Estates, a pristine, overpriced suburban development where the grass was cut to military precision and the sidewalks were so clean you could eat off them. I bought the place because it was quiet, or so I thought. I'd been working as an Interpol agent for over a decade. My work was international, counterterrorism, cross-border drug busts, human trafficking takedowns. I'd lived in places where gunfire was a background noise and car bombs were a weekly event. After years of that, I wanted somewhere normal, peace, stability. But HOA Karen was a war zone of her own. I noticed her watching me from across the street. Not just once, not casually. Every time I left for work, every time I came back, even when I took the trash out at night. She had that self-appointed ruler vibe, the kind of person who thinks a $75 HOA fee makes them God's chosen lawmaker. The first month, it was small things. Notes on my door about trash bin placement. Warning for unapproved flowers in my garden. Petty fines that came with threats of legal action if unpaid. But it escalated. It was a Friday night when I came home to blue flashing lights. 2 police cruisers were parked outside my house, and Karen was standing in my front yard, arms folded, a smug smirk plastered across her face. One of the officers approached me. "Sir, we received a call about vandalism. HOA board members claim you've been spray painting residents' fences." I blinked. "Come again." Karen stepped forward, holding her phone like it was Exhibit A in a courtroom. "I have proof. Security footage of him near the fence at 11 p.m. last night. Look." The video was blurry, grainy, and clearly not me. The guy in the footage was taller, heavier, and wearing a hoodie. But Karen narrated over it like she was a prosecution in a murder trial. The officers looked unconvinced, but they had to follow procedure. They took my statement, asked a few questions, and left without arresting me. Karen, however, stayed. "People like you ruin communities," she hissed. "We'll make sure you're removed from here." I walked inside without saying a word, because the truth was I could have ended it right there, shown my badge, called a friend in the department, or simply crushed a fabricated case in minutes. But I didn't, because now I was curious. The next week, more evidence appeared. Anonymous complaints filed with the HOA about me harassing neighbors. Letters slid under my door warning me to move out before things get worse. I began my own investigation, quietly, the way I'd been trained. I started mapping Karen's daily routines, the visitors to her home, and her communications with other board members. The more I dug, the more rotten the HOA smelled. Turns out Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was running the board like a small-town mafia. She'd been issuing fake fines, skimming money from community funds, and threatening residents into silence by fabricating violations. And now, she'd chosen me as her next target. Bad idea. One night, I sat in my dimly lit home office, pulling up public records, financial statements, and emails I'd intercepted. Piece by piece, the picture became clear. Karen was laundering HOA funds through fake maintenance companies, businesses registered under her cousin's name. She was also using her position to target anyone who opposed her, forcing them to sell their homes at below market prices, and then flipping them for profit. I leaned back in my chair, smirking. She thought I was just another regular guy she could bully. She had no idea she'd picked a fight with someone who'd dismantled cartels twice her size. The night I decided to strike back, I made sure it would be slow, painful, the kind of revenge you savor. Step 1. Surveillance. I installed hidden cameras across the street, Not just at my house, but at strategic points covering Karen's property. Step 2. Financial chokehold. I created a detailed report of her embezzlement and sent it anonymously to a few concerned residents on the HOA mailing list. I knew gossip spreads faster than truth in neighborhoods like this. Step 3. Turn her allies against her. I dug into the other board members, most had skeletons in their closets. Once they realized I knew their secrets, they'd have no choice but to back away from Karen or risk going down with her. It was time to move from defense to offense. By Monday morning, the gossip engine of Maplewood Estates was in full throttle. The concerned resident email I'd sent had worked even better than I imagined. Karen's name was suddenly on everyone's lips, not with the respect she craved, but with suspicion. People whispered at the mailbox, shot her looks at the community pool, and started asking her questions she couldn't answer. And the best part? She didn't know it was me pulling the strings. The first real crack came during the HOA's monthly meeting. I sat quietly in the back corner of the clubhouse, watching as Karen took her usual place at the head of the long, polished table. She looked confident, too confident. She thought her reputation could survive anything. The agenda was routine: landscaping budgets, pool maintenance, and parking violations. Then Mrs. Callahan, a soft-spoken woman in her 60s, raised her hand. "Karen, could you explain why the HOA paid $28,000 last quarter to North Star Maintenance for lawn care?" "Because I checked the company registry, and that business doesn't seem to exist." The room went silent. Karen's face stiffened, her eyes darting briefly in my direction before she forced a smile. "That's a legitimate vendor. We, contracted them for special upkeep projects." Mrs. Callahan didn't back down. "Then why is the mailing address the same as your cousin's house?" I almost laughed. The ripple of murmurs across the room was delicious. Karen ended the meeting early, but the damage was done. By the next morning, 3 board members had resigned. One of them, a nervous-looking man named Hal, called me anonymously, whispering into the phone like he was giving testimony in a mob trial. "I don't know who you are, but thank you. She's been bleeding this neighborhood dry for years." I didn't tell him my real role. Not yet. I just encouraged him to share anything useful if he wanted Karen gone. 2 days later, my doorbell rang at 6 a.m. I opened it to find 2 uniformed officers standing there, their cruiser idling behind them. "Sir, we had multiple complaints that you've been seen breaking into cars in the neighborhood." I sighed. This was her counterattack. She'd realized the whispers were closing in, so she decided to bury me under a pile of false police reports. Fortunately, I'd been ready for this. I invited the officers inside, offered them coffee, and showed them the footage from my hidden street cameras. There, clear as daylight, was a hooded figure trying car doors in the dead of night, and it wasn't me. In fact, I had a perfect alibi. I was on an encrypted call with an Interpol field team in Europe at the exact time. The officers left with a new perspective on who was telling the truth in this neighborhood. Now it was time for phase 2 of my plan, making her feel trapped in her own home. I arranged for her to receive an official-looking letter from a county zoning department, claiming her backyard shed violated multiple code regulations and was subject to immediate demolition fines. She didn't know the letter was fake. It was bait. When she stormed into the county office the next morning demanding answers, the clerk had no idea what she was talking about. She left furious and humiliated. The moment she pulled into her driveway, she noticed another surprise. Someone had left a copy of the HOA bylaws taped to her front door, with a section on president misconduct highlighted in red marker. Her paranoia went through the roof. But I wasn't just hitting her with mind games. I was quietly lining up the kill shot. Using my Interpol resources, I dug deeper into her cousin's shell companies. What I found was gold. They weren't just laundering HOA money. They were tied to an active fraud investigation in another state. That meant I could connect her to interstate financial crimes. And interstate crimes meant federal jurisdiction. She had no idea that the ordinary neighbor she tried to frame for vandalism was a federal-level operative with the authority to make her world disappear in a single phone call. The final blow for this chapter came when I decided to expose her to the people she relied on most, her allies on the HOA board. I sent each of them an anonymous packet containing photocopies of the fraudulent invoices, side by side with screenshots from property records showing Karen's cousin as a business owner. Within hours, I could see the ripple effect. Karen's closest ally, a realtor named Brenda, stopped returning her calls. Hal, the man who'd called me, posted a cryptic message in the community Facebook group. Sometimes a rut starts at the top. The queen bee's hive was falling apart. That evening, I sat on my porch with a glass of bourbon, watching her pace up and down her living room through the window. She was on the phone, yelling, gesturing wildly. Every so often, she'd glance out toward my house. She knew I was involved now. She just didn't know how deep this was going to go. And the thing about people like Karen, when they are desperate, they make mistakes. Big ones. And I was waiting for exactly that. She thought the whispers were bad. But what's coming next? That's going to be loud enough to ruin her life in every corner of this city. She framed the wrong man, and now she's going to learn exactly what an Interpol agent does when he decides to go on the hunt. Karen's mistake came exactly 1 week later. It was 3:42 a.m. when my phone buzzed with an alert from one of my street cameras. I rolled out of bed, flicked the monitor on, and there she was, HOA Karen, creeping across my lawn with a can of spray paint in one hand and her phone in the other. She didn't see the infrared lens watching her every step. She walked straight up to my garage door and started painting big, dripping red letters. Criminal. Then she toned, took a few stage photos of her work, and marched back toward the street. I almost laughed. She wasn't just escalating. She was digging her own grave. This was no longer a petty HOA dispute. This was felony property damage, caught in crystal-clear 4K. By sunrise, I had the footage backed up in 3 places and a still frame printed out in high resolution. I didn't take it to the police yet. No, that would be too easy, too fast. Instead, I slipped the photo into an unmarked envelope and placed it in the mailbox of her closest remaining ally, Brenda. I knew Brenda had already started distancing herself from Karen, but seeing physical proof of crime, that would burn the bridge completely. Sure enough, by midday, I spotted Brenda storming out of Karen's house, yelling loud enough for half the street to hear. "You're insane, Karen. You're going to drag us all down." Music to my ears. But I wasn't satisfied yet. I wanted her to feel cornered on every side, financially, socially, and legally. First, I used a contact in the county record department to quietly flag her cousin's shell companies for a random audit. The kind of audit that uncovers everything. Within 48 hours, she'd be buried in document requests and forced to explain a paper trail she couldn't justify. Second, I pulled the HOA's full financial records from the last 5 years and highlighted every suspicious transaction, dozens of them. I sent the file anonymously to the county prosecutor's office. They didn't know it yet, but they were sitting on a fraud case that crossed state lines. And then, I set up the bait for the final trap. It came in the form of a fake tip-off. I had a friend pose as a disgruntled resident and tell Karen he'd overheard me bragging about hiding evidence in my garage. Predictably, Karen couldn't resist. That night, she showed up in my driveway with 2 of her lackeys, flashlights in hand. I let them snoop. In fact, I wanted them to, because inside, waiting for them, was a single briefcase with a GPS tracker hidden inside the lining. They took it, of course. And within hours, I was watching the tracker's signal as it traveled straight to Karen's house. Inside the briefcase, absolutely nothing incriminating, just blank paper. But the moment they crossed my property line and took it, they committed burglary. And now, I had irrefutable evidence of them transporting stolen property. I didn't report it immediately. I let it stew. I wanted her to wake up each morning wondering if today was the day the police would show up. Meanwhile, her support network collapsed completely. The HOA board called an emergency vote and stripped her of her presidency. Her name was now synonymous with fraud in the neighborhood Facebook group. Parents pulled their kids away when she walked by. She was alone and angry. The anger finally boiled over during one of her infamous sidewalk confrontations. I was walking my dog when she came charging out of her front door, finger pointing like a weapon. "You think you're clever, don't you? I know it's you. You've been turning people against me." I stopped, met her glare, and for the first time, I let a sliver of the truth slip out. Karen, I'm not just your neighbor. I'm the man who's about to make you wish you'd never moved here. Her face drained of color. She didn't understand the full weight of those words. Not yet, but she could feel the threat in them. That night, I made the final preparations. I compiled every piece of evidence. A footage of her vandalizing my property. A records of fraudulent HOA transactions. A proof of her involvement in shell companies tied to interstate fraud. The GPS data showing her in possession of stolen property from my garage. By the time I was done, the file was over 200 pages thick. I didn't send it to just one place. I sent it to everyone. The local police department, the county prosecutor's office, the state attorney general, and Interpol's own liaison with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. This was no longer a neighborly dispute. This was an operation. The next morning, Karen's nightmare began in earnest. 2 unmarked black SUVs rolled into Maplewood Estates just as she was leaving her driveway. Federal agents stepped out, badges glinting in the sun. They spoke to her for less than a minute before placing her in handcuffs. The neighborhood gathered to watch as she was escorted into the back of the SUV. Some filmed it. Others just shook their heads. I stayed on my porch, coffee in hand, and gave her a small nod as the door closed. She finally knew. She'd tried to frame an Interpol agent. And she'd lost. She thought being arrested was the end. But she's going to find out that prison isn't the worst place I can send her. I'm not done yet. Not until her reputation, her fortune, and every ounce of power she's ever had is burned to the ground. Karen's arrest was just the opening act. A dramatic scene, sure, but it wasn't enough. Prison could be temporary. Reputation destruction? That's permanent. The morning after the arrest, I started Phase 3 of my operation. First, I followed the money. Interpol's database gave me access to every suspicious transfer her cousin's companies had ever made. I traced them like breadcrumbs, out of state, then offshore, then right back into Karen's personal accounts. I sent a condensed, easy-to-read version of those records to 3 local news outlets, framing it as exclusive evidence from a whistleblower exposing HOA corruption. By lunchtime, the first story hit the headlines. Maplewood Estates HOA president accused of multi-state fraud ring. The comments section exploded. Former residents chimed in about being bullied into selling their homes. One man said she'd fined him $1,000 for having his Christmas lights up too long. A woman claimed Karen had her dog seized for barking violations. Every story was another nail in her coffin. Meanwhile, inside jail, Karen was learning what it meant to be truly powerless. I had a friend on the inside, a corrections officer who owed me a favor from an old case. He made sure Karen was placed in a cell block where everyone had seen the news about her. HOA tyrants don't earn sympathy behind bars. Rumor had it she'd been called the property cop by her cellmates, and not in a friendly way. But I wasn't just attacking her public image. I was dismantling her financial survival. Step 1. I filed anonymous tips with the IRS about her undeclared income from a fraud ring. They froze her bank accounts pending investigation. Step 2. I reached out to every vendor she'd worked with legitimately, landscapers, security companies, maintenance crews, and informed them, with proof, that she'd been using fake invoices to embezzle funds. Contract was terminated. Step 3. I quietly contacted a mortgage lender and revealed that she was under federal investigation. The bank triggered a clause that allowed them to demand the full remaining balance immediately. She couldn't pay it. Foreclosure proceedings began. Her home, the throne she ruled from, was now slipping through her fingers. The coup de grace came from an unexpected source. Remember Brenda, the ally she'd alienated earlier? Turns out Brenda had her own stack of dirt on Karen, recordings of HOA meetings where Karen openly discussed getting rid of certain neighbors to drive down property prices. I arranged for those recordings to leak directly onto the community Facebook page. Within hours, they went viral, not just in Maplewood Estates, but in HOA watchdog groups across the country. Karen had officially gone from neighborhood queen to national example of HOA corruption. But here's the thing about people like Karen. They're too arrogant to admit defeat. Even from jail, she tried to rally support, sending letters to a few remaining friends, insisting she was framed by a dangerous man next door. Unfortunately for her, I'd already set up the perfect final trap. I had Hal, the nervous ex-board member, write her back. In his letter, he pretended to be sympathetic, even offering to help get evidence against me. But what he actually did was slip in a doctored USB stick containing a fake audio file of me supposedly admitting to planting evidence against her. As soon as she tried to send that USB to her lawyer, prison security intercepted it and examined the contents. They found not just a fake file, but hidden metadata tying the stick back to Karen's own cousin's laptop, which made it look like she had fabricated evidence. That alone was enough to add witness tampering to her list of charges. Now she wasn't just looking at fraud, she was facing years of federal prison time. And that, finally, was when I visited her. It was a short, controlled meeting in the jail's visitation room. She sat across from me, eyes bloodshot, hands cuffed to the table. You did this to me, she whispered, her voice trembling between rage and despair. I leaned forward, keeping my tone calm. No, Karen, you did this to yourself. You framed the wrong man, and now you're going to live the rest of your life knowing it. I stood, leaving her staring at me through the glass, and as I walked away, I could feel the weight of every resident in Maplewood Estates lifted. Karen wasn't coming back. She's lost her freedom, her house, and her money, but I'm going to take the one thing she's still holding on to, her pride. And when I'm done, she'll be nothing more than a cautionary tale people whisper about for years. Karen thought her trial would be her last chance at redemption, a stage where she could spin the narrative, plead for sympathy, maybe convince a jury she was the victim of some elaborate vendetta. She didn't know I'd already arranged for that stage to collapse under her feet. The trial began on a rainy Tuesday morning. The courthouse was packed, neighbors, reporters, even a few former HOA board members. Karen shuffled in wearing an ill-fitting beige suit, her wrists free but her expression grim. She avoided eye contact with me, but I could feel her trying to project defiance. The prosecution opened with the obvious, the vandalism footage, the stolen briefcase GPS data, the financial records. It was already a slam-dunk case. But I had been saving one last card, not for the prosecution, but for the public. 2 days into the trial, I contacted a journalist from the biggest local TV station. I gave her an exclusive, the recordings of Karen openly discussing targeting families with kids, manipulating property values, and using HOA fines to push out undesirables. The journalist aired the clips that very night. By the next morning, the courthouse steps were swarming with protesters holding signs. HOA tyrant out. No more Karens in power. Some even wore T-shirts with her mugshot. In court, Karen's lawyer begged the judge for a change of venue due to media bias. Denied. She started fidgeting more with each passing witness, especially when Brenda took a stand and calmly described years of bullying, fines, and personal harassment at Karen's direction. By the time it was my turn to testify, Karen was already cracking. I didn't go into my full Interpol background for the jury. That wasn't necessary, but I did lay out, in meticulous detail, every documented action she'd taken against me and my neighbors. I let the facts speak for themselves, and they spoke loudly. The verdict was inevitable, guilty on all counts. Fraud, vandalism, burglary, witness tampering. The judge sentenced her to 12 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for the first 7. Gasps filled the courtroom. Karen's face went pale. She turned toward the gallery, toward the handful of people who might have once supported her, but found no sympathy. Not a single one met her eyes. But I still wasn't done. Before sentencing, I'd filed a civil lawsuit against her for damages, not just for the vandalism, but for emotional distress, lost property value, and legal costs. The judge awarded me full compensation, over $350,000, money she didn't have. When her house was auctioned off to cover the debt, I made sure the buyer was a sweet retired couple who'd been on her fine list for years. I gave them a discount on the legal fees in exchange for one thing. They agreed to repaint the entire exterior a cheerful pastel pink and install an enormous front yard flagpole. The very sight of it, if Karen ever returned, would be a symbol of her complete and permanent defeat. In prison, she tried one last move, a letter to a local paper claiming she'd been railroaded by a shadowy international agent. I let it publish. Then I anonymously submitted proof of her guilt directly to the editor, who printed a follow-up the next day under the headline, Karen's lies exposed. HOA villain's last act fails. Her own word became a final humiliation. The years rolled on. Maplewood Estates thrived without her. The HOA rebuilt with fair leadership, property values rose, and community events returned. As for me, I stayed in the neighborhood. I tended my garden. I walked my dog. And every so often, a new resident would ask about that Karen woman they'd heard rumors about. I'd smile, sip my coffee, and tell them the story, not as a boast, but as a warning. Never mistake silence for weakness. And never, ever frame the wrong neighbor. Karen never came back. She'll leave prison one day, older, broke, and forgotten. But her name? It's now permanently engraved in the Hall of Shame, both in our community and on every HOA watchdog forum in the country. She wanted control. I gave her a legacy instead, one she'll never live down.